behavior of the data, and if the behavior looks malicious, it will then raise an alert and warn the administrator. Then let's come to honeypots. We just discussed in the previous slide that an IPS or an intrusion prevention system can be pre-configured that if it detects an anomaly or if it detects an intrusion, it may redirect the traffic to a honeypot. What is a honeypot? A honeypot is a decoy system. It is created to showcase a certain set of vulnerabilities to try to attract the attention of an attacker. Now, the word here is used as lure, but it's more to deceive the attacker. For example, if the attacker has been able to bypass your firewall and your IDS and now can scan the entire subnet, when they scan it, they would come across a device which is pretty vulnerable or showcases some vulnerabilities, which would definitely impress the hacker, because they would think that it is a vulnerable server which contains some valuable data. And that's exactly what honeypot is. It's a decoy server trying to act as a production server, trying to showcase that it has some valuable data but also has some vulnerabilities in it, so that the attacker can be attracted towards it and spend some time trying to attack it or analyze the honeypot. At the same time, the honeypot will analyze the data traffic and it will warn the administrator of a possible intrusion, which will give the administrator enough time to secure the rest of the network, and will also get to analyze the logs of the honeypot to try to understand what kind of attacks the attacker is trying to create and try to reverse engineer and identify the attacker at the same time. Let's talk about security testing. Security testing is nothing but a method which is carried out to identify threats and loopholes in a system. So here we are going to do a vulnerability analysis and penetration test. We may also go ahead and do a security audit. So what is vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, and security auditing? Vulnerability scanning is the activity which you're conducting to identify or look at possible weaknesses or issues or vulnerabilities or misconfigurations that exist in your infrastructure. So it is a proactive way where a team of security experts will launch a vulnerability scanner, scan certain devices that they have pre-identified, and once the report from the vulnerability scanner comes in, try to analyze the report and make sense out of it to see if there are any vulnerabilities that can be identified on those devices. This is obviously an ongoing process. Why? Because operating systems are patched, upgraded, new versions of softwares are released, and we keep on upgrading and we keep on changing our IT infrastructure ever so often. And hence, the IT infrastructure, like I say, is an ever evolving process. And to be abreast of all the latest vulnerabilities and threats, we need to do the vulnerability analysis in an ongoing manner to identify possible threats to the organization. So then what is penetration testing? Vulnerability analysis is just identifying the vulnerabilities, gaps, misconfigurations that may be in the organization's infrastructure. A penetration test is basically to validate whether those vulnerabilities that have been reported are real. If yes, how complex are they? What would be the impact? And what would be the technological impact? And what kind of data would be compromised? Or what would be the end result of that attack if it actually happens in the real world? So here, a bunch of ethical hackers would simulate an attack from a hacker's perspective or from an insider's perspective, a malicious outsider or a malicious insider, depending on how they perceive the vulnerability as. And then they will try to test the vulnerability to see how it can be exploited, to what extent it can be exploited, and what would be the compromise or what would be the data leakage that would happen if this vulnerability gets exploited. So there are three ways a penetration test can be conducted. There is a black box testing, a gray box testing, and a white box testing. If you look at black box testing, this is where the tester, or the penetration tester rather, has no knowledge about the organization, their infrastructure, applications, or anything. So this is where you're simulating a hacker who's sitting on the outside, who has no knowledge about the organization. So they start from the information gathering phase, where they're going to try to figure out the IP addresses, the IP ranges, devices, operating systems, applications, and anything and everything that the organization is going to use, and then try to figure out vulnerabilities within them and then try to attack those vulnerabilities. This is a very time consuming and a cost consuming audit. The second one is a gray box testing audit, where a partial knowledge is given to the penetration tester. So this simulates a regular user kind of an attack. So let's say if I'm a regular user in an organization, and when I say regular user, I'm saying I'm not an administrator. So I have got limited access. And based on that limited access and the limited knowledge that I can gather about the infrastructure by being a regular employee, we are going to simulate a test with that knowledge to see whether an employee can take disadvantage of any vulnerabilities and then try to worm their way into the organization's infrastructure and hack it. The white box testing, on the other hand, is where we're looking at an insider, a malicious insider who already has all the accesses, who already has all the controls in his hand. So simulating an administrative access and then trying to figure out whether this administrator can escalate their privileges and gain some other administrator's access and try to then compromise data. For example, even if I'm saying I'm an administrator, I am not the only administrator in the organization. There would be backup administrators, there would be system administrators, there would be the Active Directory administrators, there would be application administrators, database administrators, and so on and so forth. So every single component that we have may have a different administrator. For example, switches would have a different administrator. Same thing with firewalls or any other security controls that you have. So if I am a administrator for backup, can I then try to worm my way out, escalate my privileges as a regular administrator or a system administrator, and then crack their passwords, try to get access and manipulate some data? So these are the 3 types of penetration testing audits that you will come across. There would be some different subtypes, but every organization can customize these kind of audits to whatever they require.